I already know what's happening.
Yeah, not as much as Laura, but yeah.
Oh, thanks guys for choosing us over AgGag. We didn't want to choose us over AgGag.
I did.
Yeah, that's right.
I chose you guys. I guess we should go ahead and get started. Yeah, so this is going to be very casual because there are very few of us, but that means that you guys are going to get the real deal on international farm animal protections. My name is Melanie. I'm the president of this. Come on in. Come on in.
You're late.
We're literally just starting. Have a seat. Towards the front, preferably.
Yes.
Oh.
I know, he was like, so your face.
Yeah, really. I was just introducing myself. You guys already know me. I'm Melanie, the president of the SALDF chapter at Columbia Law, and we are really lucky to be joined by two fantastic speakers today who will educate us all about international farm animal protection. Dr.
Motupalli.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Comes to us having recently finished her PhD in Europe. She's been working on farm animal issues and actually working on farms as a scientist and as a biologist for over 10 years. She's worked on dairies, she's done research, she is all about animal welfare, and now she works with WISPA to inform their advocates on the scientific side of protecting farm animals at home and abroad. And she will be our first presenter. And then we're also lucky enough to have Dr. Mirle here with us from the Humane Society International. And she is also a farm animal policy expert. I'm sorry, we didn't get a chance to chat before the panel started.
Yeah.
So I will let her tell you more about her work. And she'll also give a short PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll just have some Q&A, conversation. It'll be great.
Yeah,
That's all I got.
That's awesome. You managed to do everything. So that's great.
So over here.
Thanks, Melanie. Thank you for that introduction. And I just want to say thanks to the organizers for having World Animal Protection here. So I come from a science background. I don't come from a law background, so it's been kind of a nice change of perspective. So what I'm going to be talking about today are some of the recent advances in farm animal welfare that we've seen in the European Union from a legislative perspective. So I'm going to quickly go through who we are, move on to some of the legislative changes, and then I want to show you what that actually looks like on the ground, and then we'll kind of tie in some US context. And I just want to note that that's somebody just drew. I didn't do that. Somebody just got overzealous and wrote. So World Animal Protection is a global NGO, so we work in 16 offices around the world, and we're headquartered in London. We work in 4 main program areas, so animals and communities, so mostly the inhumane culling of dog populations, animals and farming, humane and sustainable agriculture, animals and disasters, so disaster management, and animals in the wild, so we work on oceans and wildlife trade. So some of you might be familiar with these comments made by Dave Warner. So he's the comms director of the National Pork Producers Council. And in 2012, when he was asked about gestation crates, does everybody know what gestation crates are? Yeah? He said, so our animals can't turn around for the 2.5 years that they are in stalls producing piglets. I don't know who asked the sow if she wanted to turn around. So I'm not going to comment on the ludicrous nature of this statement, but what it does is help me illustrate the role of animal welfare science in animal protection, because the answer to that question is we asked. Science literally asked those questions. So we found out that because they can't turn around, because they can't have physical exercise, they have decreased cardiac function, which means that there's a lot more stress during transport. Their hearts literally can't take it, so they die. They obviously have less skeletal integrity just because they physically can't move around. So that leads to things like lameness. Lameness obviously leads to things like an inability to literally stand up and sit down, which is arguably the only thing that they can do in gestation crates. And the other thing that we ask is, and the other thing that we find out, is the concept of behavioral needs. So the reason why we know that animals, particularly farm animals, absolutely have behavioral needs is again because we asked. So we know that hens need to perch because we ask them to push weighted doors of increasing weight in order to gain access to a perch at night. And what we found out is they basically maxed out the weight. So at the point where they physically could not push because they're hens and they're small, that's the point at which they stop pushing to gain access to a perch. We also know that dairy cows want access to pasture when given a choice, but only at night, which is a really interesting distinction. So they're not really that bothered about it during the day, but they really want access to pasture at night. And that's highlighted by the fact that they will work as hard to gain access to pasture at night as they will to gain access to fresh feed. And if anyone knows anything about high-yielding dairy cows, access to fresh feed is a really big deal, okay? And so because they want that so much, it's a really telling thing that they want it at the same level that they want access to pasture. So Dave, we definitely have asked those questions, and that's sort of just to help you understand where science kind of fits in, okay? So moving on to the EU now, I just want to help you understand a little bit how the EU works. So the EU has three main bodies. You've got the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council of Ministers. And at the very base, the European Commission drafts legislation, the European Parliament then amends the legislation, and then the Council of Ministers can amend it further, and with joint authority with the Parliament, they vote on it. So they either pass it or they reject it, okay? So the European Union can pass regulations, or what they call directives. And the directives literally direct the member states to pass their own national legislation, okay? So the directives don't do anything in and of themselves, but they ask the member states to pass their own national legislation. And those directives will override any contradictory national legislation, okay? So in the last 10 years, there have been three major phase-outs of animal production measures based on animal welfare concerns via legislation, okay? That's really, really important because it's the first time that you get, again, animal production methods phased out because of animal welfare concerns. So you've got veal crates phased out in 2007, you've got battery cages phased out in 2012, and then you have gestation crates phased out in 2013. And I'm gonna focus on battery cages today because that's sort of the climate that's in the US right now, so it might be helpful. So before the EU laying hen directive that phased out these battery cages, there were two really important things that I think that happened before. So the first thing was in '96, the Scientific Vet Committee that was put together to look at the welfare of laying hens and battery cages highlighted the severe and inherent disadvantage for the welfare of laying hens in these cages, okay? So they condemned battery cages from a scientific point of view. The second thing that they did was really important is they formally acknowledged that hens have behavioral needs. So they need to perch, they need to nest, they need to dust bathe. And those things were not possible in battery cages. The second really important thing that happened was in '97, you have the Treaty of Amsterdam that formally introduces the language of animal sentience and gives it legal status. Now this is incredibly important because it's a formal acknowledgement that animals and farm animals have the capacity to suffer, and because they do, we have to protect their welfare in farming. And then finally in '99, you get the EU laying hen directive, which effectively phases out battery cages by 2012. So if we look at what the directive says on paper, so don't worry too much about the numbers. I just want to focus on the fact that two of the main things that happen is you get a difference in the space requirement, and you get a difference in the provision of resources to promote natural behavior. So two systems were allowed, the enriched cage system and alternative systems, which are barn, free range, and organic, and I'll show you a picture of those guys. So in terms of the enriched cage, you can just see, so they used to have 432 centimeters squared per head, now they have 750 centimeters squared, so that's, I think, approximately 116 inches squared. And then alternative systems, you can't have more than 9 laying hens per meter squared. Again, don't worry about the numbers, it's just there is a difference now in the space requirement. But now all systems have to have nests, they have to have perches, they have to have litter, and unrestricted access to a feed trough, okay? So come January 1st, 2012, what happened? 13 out of the 27 member states were non-compliant. 2013, 8 were non-compliant. Italy and Greece were actually taken to court, 2014, Italy and Greece were found guilty of infringement of the directive by the EU Court of Justice, but no fine was imposed except for the cost of legal proceedings. And that was because of the financial crisis. So even though Italy is one of the largest egg producers, there was no fine imposed. Now there's two interesting things here. And one is that the EU relied on the member states to report their own compliance. So there was no independent inspection. So it was basically like, are you compliant? Yes. Okay. The second thing is obviously the countries that were compliant by January 1st and that bore the cost of upgrading their facilities and bore the labor costs of knowledge, increased knowledge, because these systems are more complicated than battery cage systems, were understandably annoyed. So they asked the EU for an intra-EU trade ban. But the EU basically said no, and that it was up to the member states to ensure that non-compliant eggs were not marketable. So they basically put it on them and said, be better. So that's not great. So if we look like what the changes actually look like on the ground, 60% of hens are still in cages. They are in enriched cages. So you can see the picture here is actually, this picture is actually of a facility in California. This is after Prop 2. But you see the nest flaps here, so they have some area to nest. Under here you can't actually see very well, but there's perches under here. And in the front, so this is sort of a point of contention with me. In the front, which you can't really see, they have a little scratch pad, and they spit out some food on it, and that's considered litter. So there's a lot of variation. So this isn't what all the cages look like. So sometimes they have a separate dust bathing area, and they have real litter. But this is sort of the type of enriched cage that you can see. And then 30% are in barns. So that's the alternative system, that if producers went to alternative systems, that's what they would choose, okay? So this particular barn has 2 tiers, so you can perch here, you can perch up here. There's a large dust bathing run in the back and the sides, but it's a barn, they don't go outside. The rest of hens are in free-range systems, organic systems, and some of them are still in battery cages. So some EU states are taking it a little bit further. So Belgium and Austria are looking at an enriched cage ban, so completely banning all cages. In terms of actually affecting hen welfare, they're not really big players in egg production, so I don't really know how much that's going to do. Austria is a pretty interesting country because in '99 they actually voted against the laying hen directive because they didn't think it took it far enough. Germany has stricter space requirements than the EU directive asked for. Again, not sure how much this is going to help because Germany is the largest importer of eggs, and there's no intra-EU trade ban, so they're not importing eggs that have their same strict space requirement. And then I'd like to throw in Switzerland and also Sweden. They're not part of the EU, but they already have a complete cage ban. So if we look at it from a US context, so as we heard with the keynote speaker, we have currently no federal legislation that protects farm animals during rearing. What we do have is a trend towards individual states starting to enact some of these phase-outs as well. So you've got 8 states that are looking at or have already enacted a gestation crate ban. And some of these are quite a big deal. So Ohio, Colorado, Michigan, these are really big hog producers. So it's no small thing for them to phase out gestation crates. And then obviously you've got 4 states that are looking at battery cage bans. I'm sure, are you all familiar with Prop 2 in California? Yes, no, wait, he said no. Okay, so Prop 2 in California, this is really great because I was at the University of California, Davis, so I got to vote on Prop 2, which is really exciting. So Prop 2 effectively phased out veal crates, gestation crates, and battery cages for hens in the state of California. What's actually happened is a bit of a disaster, but they tried. And we don't have a veal crate industry, we don't have a gestation crate industry, so it was a really big deal for battery hens because we're the 5th largest producer of caged hens, or of eggs in the United States. So I'll come back to them. And then in general, we have a smattering of tail docking bans, veal crate bans across the United States, but nothing on a federal level. So Prop 2, in terms of what actually happened again on the ground, because I've worked on farm for a very long time, I always want to look at it at the farm level. In terms of what happened at the farm level, you have some producers, very few moved to barn systems. You have some producers that moved to this enriched cage system. but the majority of producers just started culling birds. So they started culling a lot of birds in the battery cages in order to meet the space requirement. So a lot of hens are still in battery cages, they just have slightly more space. So that's pretty unfortunate. But what California did manage to do was ban all of the import of eggs that didn't meet their proper requirements, right? Which is a really, really big deal. I don't know how they managed to do it. I'm pretty sure it's unconstitutional, but they did it. Like, I honestly, when I read this, I thought, whoa. Because California imports, so we're the 5th largest producer, but we still import 30% of our eggs. So that puts pressure on the states that we're importing eggs from to potentially start to try and change their system. The second interesting thing about this is the EU and the US are currently negotiating one of the largest free trade agreements in history. Part of that agreement has to do with agriculture. And the EU have very, very different laws in terms of food hygiene, food quality, food safety, and animal welfare. Now the EU imports 35% of its eggs from the United States. 95% of our eggs are battery eggs, but there's a battery cage ban. So it's this kind of interesting thing where they're not banning battery eggs coming in, even though they have stricter animal welfare requirements. And prior to a few years ago, there wasn't really a precedent for trade barriers based on animal welfare. But recently the WTO upheld a trade ban against Canada and Norway from steel products going into the EU on the basis of public moral concern, which had to do with animal welfare. So they do make the distinction that this was not animal welfare, this is public moral concern, but the public moral concern had to do with animal welfare. So there is a precedent, and the trade negotiations are going on right now. So it's sort of an interesting space to watch. So I don't know, how much this is going to affect any change, but there are a lot of things in our ag system that we do very differently from Europe. Europe tends to err on the side of caution. We tend to err on the side of let's see what happens, which can be a really good thing, and it can also be a very bad thing. So kind of watch that space. I think there's a lot of really interesting developments that are going to happen in terms of animal welfare and trade in the next few years. So to kind of sum up, hen welfare has improved, but we still have a really long way to go. Welfare science can help that. I sort of shove that in as a way to help you guys understand that. We can help with things like understanding how animals perceive their environment, understanding how animals make choices, what choices they want to be making, how we can design environments, how we can modify environments to improve their welfare, okay? So that's kind of the role that science has in promoting animal welfare. And also there's, maybe the potential that trade barriers could influence US production systems. We have to wait and see. Thanks for listening. Is there any time left at all, or?
Time?
Like on the 20?
Yeah. You can take some questions.
Oh, yeah. Never mind. Yeah.
Oh, did you want to say something?
I wanted to throw in some science, but it's fine.
Throw it in.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, one of the things that I always like to impart on people, which maybe you carry don't, is that simply opening the cages, sorry?
We definitely do.
Okay. That simply opening the cages doesn't take away all the welfare problems. In fact, you just get different ones, right? And it doesn't, and that's okay. We can deal with it, and that's where science comes in, and it's really exciting. So one of the biggest problems we have in cage-free systems are keel bone break. Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm one of the panelists.
Oh, great.
That's going to be talking next door about improvements to farm animals.
Oh,
in the US.
great.
So yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm shaking my head because I actually work with your organization.
There we go.
Yeah, you guys are a stakeholder. So, yeah.
Okay,
So,
well, I'll come
yeah,
talk to you later. Exciting. Okay, so one of the biggest problems that have developed in cage-free systems is keel bone breakages. And the simple reason, so the keel bone is the breastbone right here, so you can see that's me palpating a hen. Look how adorable she is. I mean, really. So I'm palpating the hen's breastbone. I'm looking for deviations or breakages. So this is a really big problem in cage-free systems. And the reason why it happens is simply because they have a lot more space, they're smashing into each other. They're, when they try to sort of move from one level to other levels of the barn, again, they collide with things. It's incredibly painful. As you can imagine, basically it does heal. You can imagine that there's constant pain from these old bone breakages, okay? So, and it's fine. Oh, because the picture's updated. So it can really reach unacceptable levels. So it's hugely variable, so it can be 2%, but it can reach up to 80%. And it's an incredibly painful thing. But one of the things that science is looking at doing is how do we modify designs in order to help mitigate this really big problem. And it's very simple things like we put ramps up in between different areas of the aviary in order for them to walk instead of trying, because hens don't really fly, I don't know if you guys know that, they jump. So they have a little bit of lift off, but the drag, it's mostly from the feet. So in order for them to walk and run across the areas, we also do things like put softer material on the perches, because one of the issues is that when a hen sits on a perch, all of the pressure goes onto the breastbone. So you get deviations and snaps. So if you just put softer material on there, it really, really helps spread the force across the perch. Okay, so I don't want to get into it too much because we're at the end, but there are a lot of problems that occur. It doesn't solve all of the problems when you open up cages, but the potential for welfare in these bigger systems is great, and the potential for welfare, as long as we keep tracking it and we keep trying to affect change and we keep trying to figure out what hens need from a very evidence-based point of view, the more we can improve their welfare. Yeah?
Do you guys have burning questions you want to ask now? Or should we have Dr. Mirle present and then we can do all the questions together? Okay.
My name is Chetana. I am the Director of Farm Animal Welfare at Humane Society International. There we go. Here should be on the desktop. So a lot of you are probably, well, first I'd like to know something about you so I can kind of, since it's such a small group, I can tailor the presentation to go through all of my slides. Are you guys all lawyers or law students?
Lawyer.
Lawyer?
Yeah, lawyer.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to, one, because I want to be cool like Priya, and two, because it's like the sexy bit, I'm just going to skip straight to some of the legal cases in Asia relating to battery hens. But to tell you a little bit about HSI, I think a lot of you are already familiar with our parent organization, which is the Humane Society of the United States. And they're doing amazing work to transform the food industry here, working on battery cages, gestation crates, and also really working to drive down the consumption of meat and the overall number of animals that we raise and slaughter for food. So HSI is an international arm of the HSUS, and we do the exact same thing, but everywhere else in the world. So there is about 77, the FAO estimate is there's about 77 billion land animals raised for food globally, and about 10 billion of those in the US. So the other 67 billion is in our purview, but we work in much of the same way. We work on the same issues. Asia is an interesting space. I'm not going to go through all of my slides, but I think a lot of you know that in the US, the numbers are kind of starting to stabilize in terms of the number of land animals that are raised and slaughtered for food. But globally, that number is projected to increase dramatically. And the majority of that increase is projected to take place in Asia. So that's why it's a particular interest of ours. And also just because it's not just a farm animal issue, right? It's an all animal issue, including human animals, if our farm populations increase to that level. Because animal agriculture, as I'm sure you know, puts such a strain on the environment. So we're working in Brazil and China. We're working on policy issues relating to trying to figure out how you reduce the demand for eggs and meat. So I'm going to skip all of this. And just go to the start of my career. 8 years ago, when I got this job, I started in India. And India, you may be surprised to know, is the third largest producer of eggs globally. And more than 80% of those eggs are produced in battery cages. So it's an enormous egg producer. All of that egg production pretty much comes from battery cages. And even though India is an interesting case, it's because it has kind of a sophisticated animal protection movement in some place, and it has really strong animal welfare laws. For whatever reason, no one was looking at chickens. So we decided that we really wanted to look at chickens, and we really wanted to take on the battery hen issue on the ground. And again, because it's in one of those key regions. So we started with, okay, well, what do we have to work with? We looked at what our counterparts in the US were doing, and they were doing a lot of work with retailers in terms of they were trying to get retailers to adopt cage-free policies, and were really shifting the market for eggs in that manner. We didn't really have that opportunity because the majority of eggs in India are sold loose and unpackaged in open air markets. So there's no labeling, there's no packaging, there's no traceability. And even if you move outside of India and look in other parts of Asia more broadly, I work with a lot of the same multinational retailers that HSUS works with here. I work with their Asian operations in Hong Kong, Singapore, that cover all of Asia. And when I meet with them and say, can you adopt the same animal welfare policy you have in the US in your Asia Pacific region? They're like, sure, just give me 18 months to figure out where our eggs are coming from, because there's no traceability in the supply chain whatsoever. It's all very scary. But in India in particular, there was really no way to get at this issue through the retail market. And so, but we had really strong anti-cruelty laws for animals. So the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act of 1960 says that a person is treating animals cruelly if he, and I put the text here, keeps or confines any animal in any cage or other receptacle which does not measure sufficiently in height, length, and breadth to permit the animal a reasonable opportunity for movement. This is in the Constitution. In another place in the Constitution, it actually says all citizens have a responsibility to show compassion towards animals. And yet, despite all of these protections, this huge battery cage industry had developed in the country starting in the 70s. So how do we take this on? Well, also, under that Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, an advisory board to the government had been established. This is actually an official government advisory board called the Animal Welfare Board of India. And it is the job of this board, the AWBI, to ensure that the animal welfare laws in the country are followed, and they also have to advise the government on animal welfare issues. So clearly they haven't been doing their job because this huge battery cage industry has developed in the country. But we weren't sure what was going to happen if we took on battery cages right away, because the PCA Act, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, had never been used for chickens before. It had been used for a whole range of other animals, but no one had ever applied it to chickens, and we didn't know what was going to happen if we tried to do that. So one of the animal scientists at HSUS said, well, why don't you guys start with starvation force molting? So are you familiar with that practice? So sometimes, and it's less common now in the US, but it still does happen, but it's very, very common in India, is that as the laying hen's productivity starts to decline, to kind of rejuvenate the productivity, and to take her into a second cycle of productive laying, they'll force them through a molting process. So they're depriving this hen of food, complete food deprivation for weeks, and it could also include water deprivation for a day or two. So it's extraordinarily cruel. They bring these hens to the point of death by starving them. And then that somehow rejuvenates their reproductive cycle. I'm sure Priya can explain better than I can later on exactly how that works. It's an extraordinarily cruel process, and it pushes them into another laying cycle. So it's an economic thing that they do. And we thought, also in the PCA Act is basically another provision that says you can't starve animals, and if there is an animal under your care, you have to provide that animal with food and water. So clearly this industry practice of starvation force molting was in violation of the PCA Act as well. So we said this is like a good test case, let's test it out, and we'll see if we can get the Animal Welfare Board of India to enforce a ban on starvation forced molting based on the PCA Act. So we tried it, and we were extremely successful. I mean, there was definitely pushback from industry. There are some great articles out there in the Indian Poultry magazine saying, starvation forced molting, that's not what it is. It's humane starvation treatment. It's Weight Watchers for laying hens or something. So it was amazing stuff, but really no pushback. Like nobody said, I mean, they said some crazy stuff, but nobody said you can't use the PCA Act for chickens. We didn't get that pushback anywhere. So we said, okay, then this is, and I'm not saying that this problem is solved in India because while the AWBI issued the order and there was no pushback and all of the states adopted it, getting this implemented is extremely complicated. You really have to have the power on the ground to go and inspect these facilities and make sure it's not happening. And it doesn't happen all the time. There's ways they can hide it from you. So the implementation of this is not perfect, and it's something we still have to work on. But at least it showed us that you can use the nation's animal cruelty laws and apply them to chickens. So we went forward from there, and we convinced the AWBI to issue an order saying that battery cages are in violation of the PCA Act, and this happened in early 2012. And so basically what the order from the AWBI said is, there has to be an immediate cessation of any new battery cage facilities coming up in the country. And there's a 7-year phase-out period for existing facilities. And so the AWBI issued the order, and they issued it to the government agencies in every state, an administrative unit in India. And we followed up aggressively with these states to say, did you get this order? What are you doing about this order? And the majority of states actually accepted the AWBI order. And they issued directions to their district, like their local kind of county level animal husbandry departments and officers to ensure compliance, to make sure, they said you should make sure there's no new battery cages coming up in your district, in your administrative area. And you should make sure that the farmers know that the existing cages need to be phased out by 2017. So they did exactly what they were supposed to do. And was this really happening? No. It's just supposed to be happening. The paperwork is beautiful for this, but it's not really happening yet. So how do we force this to happen now? The only way we can really ensure implementation is to win this in courts. In India's poultry industry it's often depicted as being a lot of small farmers with chickens in the backyard, but really there's like 6 companies that control the entire industry. They're very large, very powerful companies. The Minister of Agriculture is himself a battery egg producer, so there's a whole range of other challenges that come in here. These cases are never clean. And so right now, where we are today is that this case is being fought in the courts. These are our respondents or our defendants in the case. They're all government agencies with the exception of number 7, which is an industry organization. So basically, the court case says, and the court case, I'm going to get into trouble here because I'm not a lawyer, but I'll try to explain it the best I can based on my knowledge. It has a number of interesting elements to it. So the petitioners are the Federation of Indian Animal Protection Organizations, which is a local coalition group of animal groups within India, and 2 individuals, and 2 private individuals. And there is precedence within the country for individuals to bring a case to the Supreme Court saying that enshrined within the Constitution, within the Indian Constitution, are also the responsibilities of Indian citizens, one of which is to show compassion towards animals. And the fact that this animal protection law, the PCA Act, is not being implemented violates our constitutional rights. It's very complicated. When they first told me they were going to bring this case forward, I was like, there's no way. Like, how do you even make that link? But there was precedence for doing it. And so they did make that link. And there has absolutely been no problem moving forward with these cases. The case went first. We took it straight to the Supreme Court. We have an amazing legal team on the ground. It's a pro bono legal team. Our lead lawyer is probably one of the most prominent lawyers in India who's been fighting on behalf of the LGBT community and working to decriminalize gay sex. He's very well known for accepting social justice cases and winning them within India. and he took on this case pro bono. He's amazing. So we went straight to the Supreme Court with this case, as most of our respondents are themselves government agencies. The Supreme Court had several options. They could take the case, or they could dismiss the case and say there's no validity to this case whatsoever. And they actually, interestingly, did neither. What they did was they said, they were very nervous, and the whole way that it played out was really kind of bizarre because we didn't do any media on this. Our strategy has been to see how far can we go with this without the industry finding out or without there being any opposition up front. So let's do as much as we can quietly, and let's not really fight the battle in the public arena until we absolutely have to, because that's going to get expensive and it's going to get ugly. So let's do it cheaply and quietly, and let's go as far as we can. So we did cheaply, quietly, went really far, went to the Supreme Court. I don't know who leaked it, how anybody found out. The Supreme Court was filled with poultry industry lawyers that day. We had done no publicity on it. Somehow it leaked. It got out probably from someone within the court, the judicial system. When we filed the case, it probably got leaked. It was filled with lawyers. So you can imagine the justices who are hearing our case and the amount of pressure that they're under, because this is an extremely powerful industry. And as I mentioned, the Minister of Agriculture is himself a battery egg producer and is very opposed to this work. So all of this is going on with her, like, oh. But they couldn't say we didn't have a valid case. So they kind of took a cop-out and they said, we could dismiss your case, and then you couldn't go any further. Then it's all over. But we're not going to dismiss the case. What we're going to say is, go first, fight it out in the high courts, which is the state high courts. And if you fight it, if the case is put into 3 or 4 state high courts, the government of India obviously is going to say, we don't want to fight the exact same case in every single court in the country in 28 different courts. So then it will automatically be referred back to the Supreme Court. So that is what we were advised. And so the justices said, we're not dismissing it, we're not accepting it, we're just ripping this up and pretending that today never happened. And so that's what happened. So we all went home, and the case has since been filed in 3 different state courts, and it has not been dismissed, it's been accepted. So the process for moving it forward is going to be slow, and it's going to be complicated. And I think the brunt of it is actually going to be here. Reasonable opportunity for movement. So that's what the whole case is going to be fought around the word reasonable. And we feel like we have an incredible amount of science showing that a battery cage does not provide a reasonable opportunity for movement. But what we're seeing in the initial arguments that are coming back from the industry is that they're bringing economic arguments into the discussion of what's reasonable. So it's going to be a very interesting case. If we do win, which I absolutely know we will, not today, but it's going to drag on for a bit, but in a few years, it sets tremendous precedents because this is the 3rd largest producer of eggs in the world. So it sets precedents for the whole region, it sets precedents globally. So this has been a hard case, but India is not the only country in Asia that's working on this issue, but different animal protection, the movements in different countries have taken different approaches. In Taiwan, the most powerful animal protection group in the country is called East. And they said we're going to take a more collaborative approach with the government. And so they really talked about the fact that the majority, I think more than 90% of the eggs in Taiwan are battery caged eggs, and they wanted to phase out battery cages. But it wasn't looking positive for them to actually get a ban on it. So the Council of Agriculture met with them, was very cooperative, and they said, let's do it in steps. So instead of going forward with a legislative ban on cages, they said, let's first of all define the different types of egg production. You can have caged egg production, you can have cage-free production, and you can have free-range production. And now everything is mixed and unlabeled and unknown. So let's first start setting standards for each of those 3 types of production. Then the next step is starting to insist upon labeling the eggs. And in the meantime, the responsibility, they put kind of the brunt of the responsibility of educating consumers on yeast. And yeast, of course, doesn't want people to eat eggs at all, so, but, there's gonna be some education happening here. And the fact is that there'll be a label there. And then the next stage is that, and again, it's been a very positive relationship between East and the Council of Agriculture in terms of saying, what are the next steps going to be? And eventually, the next is, what they're doing now is to start looking at different types of policies that they can put in place that would help producers transition to higher welfare housing systems. So they're also working on this at a government level in other parts of Asia, but they're doing it in a very different way. Bhutan, I call this our 2-week campaign. It was actually not really a campaign at all. What happened in Bhutan was that Humane Society International has a program for humane street dog control in Bhutan. So basically, vaccinating and sterilizing the street dog population to bring the numbers down, bring down the number of bites, rabies infections, and to do it, and it is a predominantly Buddhist country, so to do it in a humane manner without killing the dogs. So this program was taking place, and the government just loved us, and they said, "Is there anything else you'd like us to do for you?" We were like, "Sure. Do you want to ban battery cages?" And they're like, "Yeah, let's just ban cages altogether." And so it wasn't really a campaign, and it also is not really a democracy. I mean, it's a wonderful kingdom. There's a lot of great things about them. But so, because it's, it was just an edict. So it was just an order that came down, and now there's no more cages. Well, there were never actually cages in Bhutan. There were a few battery cage facilities that were in the process of being set up. And those projects automatically halted. Done.
So you wish you had that power.
But no, Priya, I don't, because it is not that easy in every non-democratic country. It does not work that way in China or Vietnam. Vietnam, also predominantly Buddhist country, also not a democratic system. Work also needs to be done through the government. In fact, HSI is in the process of opening our office there, which we can only do if we have a government partner. Any project we initiate has to have a government partner. We had the first ever animal welfare conference in Vietnam, for which we had to go through a very difficult process to get government permissions. So everything has to be done with the government. Also, a very large Buddhist population within this country, but it has not gone like Bhutan. So here this is a project that we're doing with the Vietnam National University of Agriculture, which their universities are also under a ministry, a government ministry. They're also run by the government. So this agriculture university is also run by the Ministry of Agriculture. So not only do they train their vets and their animal scientists and their agricultural scientists in general, but this is also where all of the research and extension is headquartered. And so this is also where producers throughout the country get their information on how to raise animals. And so they were, of course, using gestation crate. It's such a trip to go to Vietnam. You find there's such crazy stories from working here. So you go to these places, to these farms, and they'll have 2 sows. And the 2 sows will be in gestation crates. And it's like, you don't need a gestation crate. You only have 2 sows. There's absolutely no reason to do this. And then, this is another great story. So I was on this farm with this woman who had 2 sows. And
Fair conversion or show you have to remember.
this is an even better story. She wanted to know how to tail dock her pig. And I'm like, you have like 2. Why do you need to tail dock? But apparently you get a higher price in the market for a tail dock pig than you do for a pig with a tail that is intact. Because people think it comes from an industrial facility. People think it comes from an industrial facility, and somehow industrially produced meat, factory farm meat, is better than small farm meat. And so she wanted to make her pigs look like factory farm pigs so she could get a higher price for
Do you
them.
think that's a hygiene thing? Do you think that they think it's safer on factory farms? Because there's maybe more regulations.
I guess there's no regulations. But they just think it's better meat, so she wants to disguise her pigs. So there's a lot of kind of crazy issues that we work through with. So Vietnam has not been Bhutan. China, and World Animal Protection knows this as well, is a tremendously challenging place to work. And so, I mean, just in closing, there's a lot of things that we can do in Asia. A lot of tools that we've used in the US and that we've even used in Latin America are, I mean, even corporations are structured differently there. We've really been able to use shareholder resolutions effectively in Latin America. We own shares, for example, in a lot of the major Latin American pork-producing companies and meat-producing companies, and we're able to show up at the shareholder meetings. A lot of retail companies where we own shares, we're able to show up and really move our issue forward that way. That's not been our experience in Asia. It's just not structured that way. But we're still trying. We're still working with all of the retailers we work with in the HSUS works with in the US. We're working with them to expand their policies to Asia Pacific, so we can kind of shift the market in that way. Because it's hard. We've not had the success working directly with producers that we've had in other places. Although we are working very closely with the investors of the financial institutions, both the public and private financial institutions that finance the major pork and egg producers in Asia, and we've been making some progress in that way in reaching the producers themselves. I'm just going to close with this slide, which is also about eggs, but which is also kind of my real hope for Asia. Are you guys all familiar with Hampton Creek Foods? Yes, some of you are. So Hampton Creek Foods is a plant-based food company it's based here in the US. It's a California company, producing alternatives to, they have Just Mayo, so it's a plant-based mayo. Just Cookie is a plant-based cookie. I keep telling people they have plant-based egg. Josh Bott keeps telling me to stop saying that. And I'm like, no, if I say it, it's going to happen. So I keep saying that in my corporate outreach. And you can see that Li Ka-shing, who's the richest man in China, is one of the investors of this plant-based egg product. And so I really feel like for us, I mean, I've kind of hitched my wagon to this star in terms of our corporate policy work, is to really push forward these plant-based alternatives within Asia. There's a lot less resistance to it than there is to the, you're taking on a huge, enormous agribusiness company. We may not have ag-gag laws, but certainly the agribusiness industry has other ways of intimidating us. I cannot tell you the number of threatening letters we've received in other parts of the world, and where in places where there is not the law and order situation that there is in the US, we worry tremendously about the safety of our staff. So, there's other ways to gag us other than ag-gag laws, which doesn't keep us from fighting the good fight. We absolutely keep doing that, but then this is also another great way we feel like to just bring down the number of animals we raise and slaughter for food globally. There's a lot more companies that are doing this, and they're not all US based. There's a lot of companies within Asia that are just producing meats that look like meat, they taste like meat, they feel like meat, they smell like meat, and we're working very hard to get those products into schools and universities so people get used to eating them and liking them. So I have hitched my wagon to this star, but certainly there's a lot else going on there as well. And I should just note, to kind of close and sum up and to link my presentation to Priya's, is that in all of the legislation that's been being looked at now in India and in Taiwan, for example, everyone is looking at the EU legislation. And in fact,
And it was the numbers were the same.
the numbers are the same, and our suspicion is that ultimately when a compromise is reached in India, that the compromise is going to be the EU standard. And so it is so important that in the United States you have a standard that's higher than the EU standard, because then we can advocate, we can use that standard and take it to other places in the world, because very few people are going to be like Bhutan and be like, let's just develop our own standard and ban cages all together. No one's doing that. They're looking for precedents. And so the stronger laws you have here, right now we're using EU laws. If you come up with something even stronger here, that's what we're able to take around and spread elsewhere. Thanks.
Questions? What's the role of genetics in these countries? Like, what types of genetics are they using for their animals? Because part of the problem in the US is that we use very particular genetics for these
genetics there's a lot of export of the genetics from the EU and the US are being exported into Asia, and you see kind of the uneven adoption of that, and so the good and bad of the adoption. So all of the large commercial facilities are using the genetics that are coming from the EU, largely from the EU and also from the US. Unfortunately, we also see this trickling out into smaller farmers. So I visited this one facility where this woman had 2 sows, and one of them was more kind of a local breed of pig that they had been using for whatever generations. But then she paid more to get this higher yield, this pig that had more meat, and she didn't understand that this pig also needs a special type of feed. It needs to be fed more in a specific way, it needs special care, and they can't handle the heat. And so she had this indigenous sow who looked, body score was good, I mean, nothing to complain about, and then this special fancy, I can't remember what landrace, what it was, but it was a European, the genetics were European, and this sow was completely emaciated, even though she was caring for them in the exact same way. So that's kind of an unfortunate side effect of that, but genetics are important, and so they're not using local breeds, so.
Yeah, you raise a really interesting point because the genetics from the EU come from the US. And the genetics that are, as you're saying, that are moving into the developing world are also coming from the US. You get little pockets in the EU. So France, for example, I don't know how much you know about broiler chickens.
That's what I'm speaking about next, actually,
Sure.
in about
Okay.
20 minutes.
Should I mention France or should I leave it?
Yeah, please, go.
Oh, yeah.
Please.
Well, I mean, so there's 2 companies that produce our genetic line for broiler chickens. Our broiler chickens arguably have one of the worst welfare simply by being a broiler chicken. France is sort of an interesting case study because they do some pretty horrible things to animals. But in terms of broiler chickens, they like slower growing breeds. So they have this thing called, it's called poulet rouge. And it's just like a slower growing kind of wild heritage breed. And they don't use it because they think it's better for animal welfare. They just physically like the taste better. They think the slower growing breed outside, feeding on forage and legume, they think it tastes better and it's really important to them. Which they're absolutely right, because in terms of how we've changed animals and the nutrition that we've changed because we want them to put on weight really fast, it actually does physically taste better. But for some reason our palate hasn't, I guess, adopted that. But that is a really big concern. My sort of area of expertise is dairy cows, and some of the things that we're seeing in India, you're seeing Holstein Friesian genetics being taken over to India. Holstein Friesians are the black and white cows that you see everywhere. They are not bred to do anything or to handle any situation but producing milk. So you take them out there because, understandably people want more milk. India is the largest producer of milk in the world, of liquid milk in the world. And you take these Holsteins out there and they just die in the heat. They cannot handle the heat. And it's a really horrible, sad situation. When you look at the indigenous breeds, they're absolutely fine. Because obviously they diverged, they evolved to deal with that situation. So I guess the answer is it's sad. And I think, but there are little pockets where I think you can exploit it in a different way, with taste preferences.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you were to actually implement the welfare standards that you personally, both of you, think is necessary or and appropriate, how much would that raise the cost of production? And would it be, my sort of hope is that it just becomes completely economically infeasible to produce it at all, but I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think it's going to be different in different countries, and this is something that we've come up against repeatedly, is that, there's data, I'm sure there's good data from the EU on this, and there's some data in the US on the cost of change in production from one system to another system. I don't think that's true. I don't think you can translate that to every different, the labor costs are different, feed costs are different in different countries, and so some countries don't even have automatic egg collection systems, for example, and that changes the picture entirely. So depending on the size of the farms. So I don't know. I think that research needs to be, in Asia at least, I think more research needs to be done on that. I would say certainly we've seen in Vietnam as the farm that we've worked with has just gotten more experience with it. They've just, all of the production variables are improved for them just as they've learned how to use it. So I don't have a perfect system in my mind of how things would look. I would like Hampton Creek, I think that's kind of awesome. But in general, for higher welfare systems, I don't really have an answer for it. But I think there's probably more data from the EU.
Can you repeat your question again? I heard
So
you.
basically, I'm wondering, you know, in my vision, you know, I would want animals to be not killed at all, but short of that, I want them to be living the farm sanctuary life.
Have you ever been on a farm?
What?
Have you been on a farm before, like a commercial scale farm?
I have not been on a commercial scale farm. I've only been to farm sanctuaries.
Yeah. You have such a that's no.
What? And it just would not be feasible.
No. It's
Good.
I think that if you want that kind of life for animals, there needs to be a massive shift in the amount of meat that we eat, and the amount of eggs that we consume, and the amount of dairy that we consume, which I think can happen if you believe in massive societal change, you know, in your lifetime. I'm in my lifetime, it's not going to happen. I'm going to tell you right now that the farm sanctuary life is never going to happen in my lifetime. But I think, yeah, if there is a societal shift, and there absolutely needs to be, not just in terms of animal welfare. I mean, we're absolutely crushing the planet, right? So I think yes, but that's if we completely shift into, you know, in the way that we consume everything right now. Because if you think about, it's not just meat. Sort of the Vegan Society had that presentation. I mean, animal products are in everything. They're in your tires. They're in your shoes. They're in, you know, the notebooks that we use. They're, you know, they're. And the kind of joke is that they're in glue. But there has to be a massive shift in order to get the farm sanctuary lifestyle.
It's just interesting because if you ask people, if you made a checklist of all of the bad things that we do to animals, people would say, oh yeah, we don't want any of that.
Right.
And so I just think it's a strategic matter. It's an interesting way of getting, you know, to abolition by just, you know, making it prohibitively expensive to actually, to just show people, look, if that's what you want, then this is how much it's going to cost. It's actually not possible to do that. And it sounds like you agree that it just isn't feasible to
At our
produce it.
current consumption rate, I would say that's not feasible.
Yeah, I agree. Also, cats need animal protein to eat. You know, to make a cat a vegan, that to me is animal cruelty. And dogs need a certain amount of meat to eat too. I think humans, yes, we can reduce our consumption of meat. If you eliminate it, you need to take some type of supplement that you would normally get just to stay healthy. So yeah.
Do you guys mind taking one more question?
Do you get?
Just have a spin-off off of Jay's question. When Prop 2 was introduced in California, was there a decline in people buying eggs, or I'm not even sure if the price was raised?
Yeah, so that Prop 2 is interesting. California is an interesting place. So Prop 2, when it, you know, January 1st, 2015, so this year, I think eggs were, they were $3.49, like on average, $3.49. And they've since come down to $2.99, because, you know, people weren't going to stop buying eggs. And that was a ridiculous, people made all kinds of ridiculous arguments, like our whole egg industry is going to move to Mexico and, you know, whatever. But no, I mean, people still bought eggs, and because they're buying eggs at the same rate, it's now come down. And I don't know if anyone, I've just moved to New York, and I can't find eggs that are under $3. So to me, that's sort of acceptable.
Just wanted to add to that is that, because we get asked this question a lot from abolitionists of, you know, like, what are you doing, you know, work to improve the welfare of animals? And there is some data that's come out from Sweden, I think, some European countries that really looked at this issue as the animal welfare standards improved for hens, what happened to egg consumption. And egg consumption, and it wasn't looking at the prices, it was just, so you know, the egg consumption, people's interest in purchasing eggs seem to decline. And I think what's happening is that when you have Prop 2, which for the first time got the issue of egg-laying hens out into the media. I mean, you had commercials on TV that showed battery cages. These things never happened before. It just got people thinking about their food and the fact that the eggs actually come from an animal and thinking about the role of animals in the food production system. And so I don't think that these campaigns to improve the welfare of animals actually drive up consumption in eggs at all. I think they actually drive down the consumption in animal products.
I think that's all we have time for. Let's thank our speakers. Do you want to? And thanks to all of you.
So there's about a 5 to 10 minute break right now, and then there'll be more panels. There'll be one about